The day had been another disheartening blow for Naruto Uzumaki. Assigned to odd jobs and kept at arm's length from true training, he had again been sidelined. Today, he'd tried joining his peers in a team activity only to be excluded with a casual dismissal. Disheartened and eager for anything that might fill the gnawing void inside him, Naruto found himself wandering through Konoha's ancient library. The library was vast, rarely visited by villagers, with countless nooks and crannies, many filled with scrolls detailing Konoha's long-forgotten techniques and secrets. It felt like the village's silent heart, pulsing with whispers of history. Though Naruto wasn't exactly known for his bookish nature, something drew him deeper into the labyrinth of shelves. As he drifted from room to room, a shadowed alcove caught his eye. Unlike the rest of the library, which was fairly orderly, this section was cluttered, almost forgotten. A dusty curtain covered the entrance, and the smell of old paper and ink hung thick in the air. Naruto pushed aside the curtain, his heart beating with a mixture of trepidation and excitement. What he found was more than he'd anticipated. An old, wooden chest sat at the back of the alcove, shrouded in cobwebs. Naruto wiped the dust from its surface, revealing intricate carvings of suns and flames along its edges. His fingers tingled as he touched the wood, feeling an almost imperceptible warmth. His instincts told him there was something remarkable within, something waiting for someone brave enough to discover it. With a deep breath, he carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay an ancient scroll, weathered and faded, alongside a sheathed blade wrapped in sealing cloth. The sword itself seemed to hum faintly, almost as if it were breathing. Naruto reached out and felt his pulse shake with its rhythm, an oddly comforting beat that seemed to resonate with his very soul. He gently lifted the scroll, the yellowed parchment crackling under his fingers as he unfurled it. The scroll's text, written in elegant, swirling script, spoke of a lost technique known as sun breathing. It described an ancient warrior who had once wielded this technique with a mastery so profound he was rumored to have the power to summon the sun itself. The scroll went on to explain how sun breathing required immense skill, discipline, and an attunement with one's spirit and willpower. The warrior's blade was forged by a deity, a legendary weapon that granted its bearer strength as fierce and blinding as the sun's own light. The weight of the discovery filled Naruto with awe. Could such a technique, such a weapon, really exist? He unwrapped the sealing cloth to reveal the blade itself. It was simple yet exquisite, its steel carrying a faint shimmer as if remnants of sunlight were trapped within. He took the hilt in his hand, feeling a wave of warmth surge up his arm, almost as if the blade had accepted him. He stared, wide-eyed, as a strange, subtle glow enveloped the sword for just a moment before fading away. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and the feeling that he'd stumbled upon something that might change his life, Naruto tucked the scroll into his jacket and wrapped the sword back in the cloth. Stealing a final glance at the hidden room, he hurried back home, clutching his discovery with excitement and trepidation. Back in his apartment, Naruto cleared a space on his cramped floor, laying out the scroll and a sword side by side. The words on the parchment felt alive, almost pulling him into a world he barely understood. Taking a deep breath, he began to read more closely, allowing the words to seep into his mind. The scroll described the fundamental form of sun breathing, teaching its reader to draw energy from within while harnessing the rhythm of the natural world. The wielder would learn to sync their heartbeat with the blade's hidden power, unlocking a deep connection to the sun's unyielding strength. The text continued with descriptions of stances and breathing techniques, each one illustrated with intricate drawings of the warrior in various powerful, graceful poses. As Naruto read, he began to feel an inexplicable warmth radiate from the sword, as though it were responding to his attention. Without even thinking, he reached for the blade, holding it in his hands as he tried to mimic the breathing pattern described in the scroll. Inhale, hold, exhale. His breaths came in slow, deliberate rhythms, filling him with an energy that pulsed from his core and traveled up his spine. Suddenly, a flash of light burst from the sword, blinding him momentarily. He could feel the pulse of power reverberate through his body, echoing from the blade and into his bones. It was intense, an unfiltered force that he could barely contain. His vision cleared, and he realized the blade was now glowing faintly, as though the sun's essence had come to life within it. Naruto's heart pounded with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. This was more than just a sword or a technique. He had awakened something that connected him to a history far beyond anything he'd known. But with this awakening came a shadow of dread, a feeling that he was about to embark on a path as perilous as it was powerful. At that moment, he heard a whisper, an ancient, deep voice resonating from within a sword. Chosen bearer, it intoned, filling the room with its weighty presence, you have unlocked a force that has long slumbered. Sun breathing is not merely a power but a responsibility. Only those with unyielding resolve can wield it. Will you walk this path, even if it leads to great sacrifice? Naruto gulped, his throat suddenly dry. But despite a fear prickling at the back of his mind, he knew his answer. With a fiery determination, he tightened his grip on the sword and nodded. I'll do it, he whispered. I'll become the strongest there ever was. The voice seemed to smile in approval, fading into a soft hum that pulsed through the blade. Naruto spent the remainder of the night practicing the stances and techniques described in a scroll, pushing himself to exhaustion and beyond. Each time he wavered, the memory of his peers' scornful looks and his own lowliness fueled his resolve. He would master this power, he had to. As dawn broke, Naruto collapsed, the sword lying beside him, still glowing with a faint, warm light. He dreamed of flames and sunlight, of battles fought under the blazing sky, of a warrior standing alone against impossible odds. In that dream, he felt as though he were part of something immense, something that would shape the world itself. When he finally awoke, he knew that his life had changed forever. The ancient force within the blade had accepted him, but he could feel that it was only the beginning. Konoha had always kept him at arm's length, treating him as an outcast, but now he held a power they couldn't ignore. The journey ahead was shrouded in mystery and danger, but for the first time in his life, Naruto felt he had a purpose, a path to follow. He tightened his grip on the sword, a fierce determination blazing in his eyes. Just watch, he murmured. I'll show them all. Little did he know, this first step would set him on a journey that would reshape the world in ways no one could have foreseen. The days that followed Naruto's discovery of the ancient sword and the mysterious sun-breathing technique were some of the most grueling and transformative of his life. The scroll's teachings weren't just about mastering a combat style, they were about transcending everything Naruto had ever known about his body and mind. Each technique, each breath, required a level of discipline that stretched the boundaries of his willpower. For the first time, he wasn't just training to become stronger, he was learning to become one with a force that flowed through him. The first lesson from the scroll had been simple in theory but near impossible in practice: synchronize the breath with the spirit. It wasn't about chakra control, the kind he was accustomed to with the village's training, but a deeper, more fundamental connection. The breath was the foundation, and without it, nothing else could follow. He could feel his lungs straining against the effort, his muscles tightening with each forced breath. Naruto sat cross-legged on the floor, sweat beading on his brow as he read the scroll once more, studying the intricate diagrams. The technique was deceptively simple, yet it spoke of mastery beyond even the best ninja's grasp. Inhale deeply, pull the air into the deepest part of your lungs, hold, and let the energy of the sun fill your chest. Exhale slowly, guiding the energy through your arms and into the blade. Let the sun's strength flow through you like an unbreakable current. He closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm of his breathing. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. The room felt heavier as the pressure in his chest built, as if the air itself was charged with an unseen power. He could feel the sword at his side, waiting, eager to become one with his breath. Every time he inhaled, it felt like something was stirring within him, something ancient and vast. But it was hard. So hard. Naruto gritted his teeth, forcing his breath to slow, forcing his mind to clear. He could feel the sweat trickling down his neck, his muscles aching in protest. It wasn't like chakra control at all, it was far more demanding. His chakra reserves had always been abundant, a wild ocean of raw power that he could summon whenever he needed it. But this technique, this sun breathing, wasn't something he could draw on through mere force of will. He had to forge an intimate connection with the energy itself, allowing it to move within him as naturally as his heartbeat. It was mental and physical focus on a level that even his training as a ninja hadn't prepared him for. The scroll's teachings warned of the danger of pushing too hard. If you tried to force the energy before you were ready, the consequences could be disastrous, leaving the user drained or, worse, burned by the very power they sought to harness. Patience is key, it said. The sun is not a force to be taken lightly. Naruto pulled himself into a standing position, his legs trembling with exhaustion. He reached for the sword and, with a sense of quiet determination, unsheathed it. The blade gleamed softly in the dim light of his room, and he could feel it calling to him, eager to join with his energy. Let's try this again, he muttered to himself, gritting the hilt tightly. He took a deep breath, aligning himself with the technique once more. Inhale, pull in the air, let the energy of the sun fill your chest. His vision blurred as he focused all his attention on the sword and a flow of air in his lungs. His thoughts slowed to a crawl, the world outside his room fading into oblivion. But then something clicked. And sharp, burning sensation bloomed in his chest as if the heat of the sun itself had flared to life within him. His body burned, the heat coursing through his veins. At first, the pain was unbearable. His knees buckled, and he fell to the floor, clutching the sword with trembling hands. The glow of the blade flared brighter, casting strange shadows across the room as if it were alive with power. Naruto's breath came in shallow gasps, the energy inside him swirling with an intensity he had never known before. He tried to pull back, to control the heat, but it was too much. The warmth of the sword seared through his body, and for a split second, he felt like he might lose himself entirely to its power. Calm down, he whispered to himself. You've got to breathe. You've got to control it. But control felt impossible. His whole body felt as though it was about to burst into flames, his skin tingling with the heat of a sun that wasn't supposed to be inside him. It was then that something shifted. His body seemed to instinctively realign, his focus locking into place. The heat no longer felt like a burden, it was a part of him. His chest opened, and the air inside him expanded to accommodate the power without suffocating him. Slowly, he exhaled, the energy flowing down his arm and into the blade. A pulse of energy shot through the sword, the light radiating outward in a fiery arc. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with an invisible force. Naruto blinked, stunned by the sudden release of power. It was the most exhilarating moment he had ever experienced. His breath came in slow, steady intervals as the energy settled. He could feel the heat lingering inside him, no longer painful but familiar, like the warmth of sunlight on his skin. The blade hummed with approval, its surface gleaming under his touch. Naruto let out a shaky laugh. He had done it. He had really done it. But the sense of accomplishment was fleeting. Even as the energy coursed through him, Naruto could feel how fragile his control was. It had taken all his focus and nearly all his stamina to bring out just a fraction of the power the sword contained. He collapsed back onto the floor, his body drained from the effort. This was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Naruto threw himself into training with a fervor he hadn't known he was capable of. The sun-breathing technique was unlike anything he had ever attempted. It demanded more than chakra control, it required him to attune his entire being to the rhythm of the sun itself. But with each passing day, he felt the sword and the technique becoming a part of him. His senses grew sharper, his reflexes faster. He could feel the pulse of energy inside him, a steady undercurrent of heat and light that he could channel at will. But it wasn't easy. The first few days of training had left him sore and exhausted, his body aching in ways that made his old training sessions look like child's play. The mental focus was brutal. Sun breathing was about control, but it was also about surrendering yourself to something greater, letting the energy flow through you without interference. Every time he attempted to push too hard, he felt the burn of the energy growing too wild, too difficult to contain. But Naruto wasn't one to give up easily. He'd trained for years, always at the edge of his abilities, pushing past his limits time and time again. This was no different. Each time he faltered, he picked himself back up, determined to master the technique that had already begun to change him. In the midst of his training, Naruto found himself becoming more attuned to the world around him. His senses sharpened. He could hear the softest rustle of leaves in the breeze, feel the faintest tremors of movement beneath his feet. He could feel the presence of others nearby, their energy reaching out to him like invisible tendrils. His connection to the world, to the very essence of life itself, deepened with each passing day. Despite the progress, Naruto often found himself doubting. Was he truly worthy of this power? The ancient voice that had spoken to him when he first unsheathed the sword had warned him of the responsibility that came with wielding such force. Sun breathing wasn't a technique that could be wielded lightly. It was a power born of the earth, of the heavens, and of the deepest parts of the human soul. Naruto had seen what power could do to people. He had seen how easily it could corrupt, how easily it could destroy. Would he be able to wield the sun-breathing technique without losing himself to its allure? There were moments, in the deepest silence of his training, when those doubts crept back into his mind. He would stand still, sword in hand, and wonder if this was really the path he wanted to walk. But then he would remember the anger, the rejection, the loneliness that had fueled his desire for strength in the first place. This power was his chance to prove everyone wrong, to show them all that he was capable of more than they ever believed. And if that meant pushing past his doubts, if that meant mastering this technique, then he would do it. He had to. And so, Naruto continued his training, pushing himself harder, reaching deeper into the power of the sun, knowing that each step forward was a step into the unknown. The mission had started like any other routine, boring, and uneventful. Naruto had joined his team on his symbol delivery mission outside the borders of Kaneda. It wasn't anything special, just a package to be handed off to a village in the surrounding wilderness. Sakura had been quiet, as usual, and Shizuke, well, Shizuke had barely acknowledged that they were even on the same team. It was the kind of mission that Naruto would normally be bored with, but after everything that had happened recently with his sun-breathing training, it was a welcome distraction. The mission had been uneventful until they found themselves ambushed in a forest. Naruto had been the first to notice the movement in the trees. His senses had become sharper, a side effect of his training with a sword. At first, it was a faint disturbance in the air, just a shift, like a sudden chill in the wind. But then, a blur of movement crossed his line of sight, and his instincts kicked in. Ambush! He shouted, but it was already too late. Figures dropped from the trees, armed and deadly, surrounding them in a blink of an eye. Sakura reacted quickly, falling into a defensive stance, while Shizuke's Sharingan snapped to attention, scanning their attackers. Kakashi, as always, was calm and collected, but even he seemed on edge. He was still recovering from the injuries he'd sustained during his previous missions, and the rogue shinobi that surrounded them weren't exactly the standard thieves or bandits. These were trained fighters, their eyes sharp and calculating. "Stay close," Kakashi commanded, positioning himself between his students and the attackers. Naruto's heart raced, but something else inside him stirred. The heat. The warmth of the sun-breathing technique lingered deep within him, thrumming like a pulse in his chest. His instincts were heightened, and his body felt alive with power, the energy that he had been slowly learning to control now surging to the forefront. They were outnumbered. The rogue shinobi moved quickly, closing the gap between them, their weapons flashing in the sunlight. A kunai came flying toward Naruto, and before he even had a chance to react, he felt his body move on its own. His breathing deepened instinctively as the air seemed to press in on him, and with one fluid motion, he drew the sword from his side. The blade hummed with a strange resonance, and before he even realized what he was doing, Naruto swung it. First form, dance. The world seemed to slow as his body became an extension of the blade. The air shimmered around him, and the ground beneath his feet cracked as he unleashed a fiery slash that sliced through the air like a blade of the sun itself. The attack sent a shockwave of intense heat racing outward, and the moment the energy hit the rogue shinobi, they staggered back in shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. The air burned as if the sun had descended upon them, the ground scorched in the wake of Naruto's slash. For a moment, everything was still. The rogue shinobi stood frozen in place, their eyes wide in terror, not just from the sheer force of the attack but from the aura that Naruto radiated. His body seemed to glow, a faint golden light surrounding him like a fiery halo. The rogue ninjas, too stunned to act, began to back away slowly, their fear palpable in the air. The heat that radiated from Naruto was unlike anything they had ever felt before. His power was raw, unrefined, and unpredictable. The sword in his hand gleamed with unnatural brilliance, like it had absorbed the very essence of the sun itself. Sakura gasped, her eyes wide. Naruto, that was what was dead. Sasuke, ever the skeptic, narrowed his eyes. He could feel the raw power emanating from Naruto, but there was no denying that it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. His mind raced with questions, but before he could speak, the rogue shinobi made their decision. Fearing the unknown power that Naruto had unleashed, the rogue ninjas turned and fled, disappearing into the trees with impressive speed. Kakashi gave chase for a few steps but soon halted, realizing that there was no point in pursuing them further. They were gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Naruto lowered his sword, the light around him flickering out like a dying flame. His breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling with each gasp as the adrenaline surged through him. He had meant to unleash so much power he had barely been able to control it. But it had worked. The attack had worked, and it had worked too well. Sakura was the first to break the silence. Naruto, that was amazing, she said, her voice filled with awe. Naruto scratched the back of his head, trying to downplay it. Nah, it was nothing. Just a lucky shot. Sasuke, however, wasn't so easily fooled. His eyes flickered with a mix of suspicion and interest. That was more than a lucky shot, he said, his voice flat but edged with curiosity. What kind of technique was that? Naruto hesitated. He couldn't tell them the truth, not yet. Not when he barely understood it himself. The sun-breathing technique was something that had become deeply personal to him. If anyone found out the full extent of what he had been learning, if they knew the power he was beginning to tap into, everything could change. Just something I've been messing around with, Naruto said with a forced grin. Nothing too special. Kakashi, who had been silent until now, eyed Naruto carefully. The masked man's gaze was sharp, and there was something calculating in his expression. He could tell that there was more to the story than Naruto was letting on. Be careful, Naruto, Kakashi said softly, his tone serious for the first time. Power like that, it can be dangerous if you lose control. Naruto nodded, the weight of Kakashi's words sinking in. He had always known that his powers could be dangerous, but this was different. Sun breathing wasn't like chakra, it wasn't something he could control just by focusing his will. It was something else entirely, something ancient, something that was both a blessing and a curse. Yeah, I know, Naruto said quietly. I'll be careful. But inside, a seed of doubt began to take root. The power he had just unleashed was something beyond anything he had ever felt before. He could feel it burning inside him, the raw potential of the sun-breathing technique and energy that could reshape the world if he chose to wield it. And yet, even as his heart raced with excitement, Naruto knew deep down that he wasn't ready to reveal the full extent of his power to his teammates, to the village. Not yet. He had to learn more. He had to understand it fully. The next few days were filled with questions both from his teammates and from Naruto himself. The ambush had been a small, lower-ranking mission, but the power he had displayed was anything but. Even Kakashi seemed uneasy around him, and although Naruto tried to play it off, he couldn't shake the feeling that the blade was waiting for something more. The more he trained with the sword, the more he realized just how little he understood about what he had unlocked. There was more to sun-breathing than just power, it was a philosophy, a way of life. And Naruto had barely scratched the surface. For now, though, he had to keep his new powers secret. It was too dangerous to let anyone know. They would look at him differently. They might even fear him. And as much as he craved recognition, as much as he longed for acceptance, Naruto knew that this was one secret he couldn't share, not until he had mastered the power within himself. For now, he would walk the path alone, feeling the weight of the sun's fire in his veins, and hoping that, one day, he could control it without letting it control him. The days following the ambush in the forest were filled with training, but for Naruto, it was no longer just about completing missions or learning the next technique. The sun-breathing method consumed his thoughts, its every form, its every breath, its every strike. He spent hours alone in secluded areas, hidden from the prying eyes of his teammates and the village, perfecting each form. His body ached as he pushed past his limits, yet every session brought him closer to something indescribable, something powerful. But as the power grew, so did the isolation. Naruto had finally mastered the basics of sun breathing, and his new form, second form, clear blue sky, was coming into shape. It was a horizontal slash, cutting the air in a wide arc, leaving behind a trail of scorching heat that could burn through anything in its path. It was a technique that required immense precision, as one wrong move could send the attack in the wrong direction or, worse, out of control. But when Naruto executed it perfectly, the results were devastating, a whirlwind of fiery energy that obliterated everything in its path. As Naruto continued his training, his strength grew exponentially. He found himself able to push his body beyond anything he had ever imagined. His reflexes were faster, his movements more fluid, and the warmth of the sun that flowed through him felt like an unstoppable tide. Every time he practiced, he felt more confident, more powerful, but also more distant. The weight of this new power started to weigh heavily on him. It wasn't just the strength that separated him from his friends, it was the feeling that they would never understand. He could see the way they looked at him now, like he was someone different. Kakashi's warnings echoed in his mind. This power was dangerous, and the more he used it, the more he risked pushing everyone away. It was like a double-edged sword, giving him strength, but slowly taking away the very things he had always fought for: his friends, his bonds. Sasuke was the first to notice the change. It had started small. Sasuke's settled glances at Naruto when they trained together, his narrowed eyes whenever Naruto used a new technique. At first, Naruto had thought it was just Sasuke being Sasuke, the brooding, competitive guy he'd always been. But lately, there was something different in the way Sasuke carried himself, something darker. Naruto wasn't blind. He knew that Sasuke had always been competitive, but the looks of frustration that now marred his teammate's face were unmistakable. Every time Naruto demonstrated a new form, every time his movements became faster or more fluid, Sasuke seemed to sink deeper into a quiet jealousy. It was becoming clear that Sasuke wasn't just frustrated with his own lack of progress, he was angry at Naruto. One afternoon, after their usual team training, Sasuke cornered Naruto on the training grounds, his eyes burning with challenge. "Let's spar," Sasuke said, his voice cold, devoid of the usual camaraderie. Naruto raised an eyebrow, surprised by the request. "What's going on, Sasuke? You've been acting weird lately." Sasuke didn't answer, just unsheathed his kunai, the usual calmness in his demeanor replaced by his sharp edge. "Let's see how much stronger you've gotten, Naruto," he said, the challenge hanging in the air between them. Naruto hesitated. He had no desire to fight Sasuke, not like this. They had always sparred together as friends, with respect and trust. But now, the tension in Sasuke's posture told him that this wasn't about friendship. This was about proving something that Naruto didn't quite understand but could sense deeply in Sasuke's eyes. "All right," Naruto said, taking a deep breath. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Without another word, Sasuke dashed forward, his Sharingan activated. His speed was blinding, his movements fluid and precise. Naruto barely had time to react before Sasuke was upon him, striking with incredible force. Naruto barely managed to parry the first few attacks, his sword moving instinctively in the way of Sasuke's swift blows. But even as he blocked, something within him stirred a heat, a burning urge to fight back with everything he had. He wasn't sure if it was the sun-breathing technique awakening within him or just his own frustration, but suddenly, everything seemed clearer. The power coursing through his veins, the precision of the sword in his hands, it all seemed to align. "Second form, clear blue sky!" Naruto shouted, his breath steadying as he unleashed a horizontal slash. The attack came faster than Sasuke could react, cutting through the air with a blistering force. Sasuke's eyes widened in surprise as the fiery arc of energy shot toward him, but he was too slow to evade it. The energy wave struck the ground beside him, sending him flying backward with the force of the explosion. Naruto's eyes widened. He hadn't meant for it to go that far. Sasuke was lying on the ground, his breath ragged as he struggled to get up, clearly stunned by the raw power of the attack. "I told you," Naruto muttered under his breath, lowering his sword. "I warned you." Sasuke slowly got to his feet, his expression a mix of anger and humiliation. He wiped the dirt off his clothes and glared at Naruto, his eyes burning with intensity. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Sasuke's voice was low, filled with frustration. "You think just because you have some new power, you're unstoppable." Naruto's stomach twisted. He had seen this look before, the look of a person who had been left behind, who had failed to keep up. But this was different. This wasn't the usual competitive fire that had always fueled Sasuke. This was something darker, something born from jealousy and a desire to prove something at any cost. "I never said that," Naruto replied, his voice quieter now, tinged with guilt. "I don't want to be better than you, Sasuke. I just want to protect my friends." But Sasuke wasn't listening. His eyes narrowed, and his fists clenched at his sides. "You've got a long way to go before you can protect anyone. If you think this power makes you strong, you're wrong. You're just hiding behind it." Naruto flinched. The words stung more than he expected. Sasuke's jealousy and frustration had become sharper, more cutting, more personal. But Naruto wasn't sure how to respond. He knew that Sasuke was struggling, but the more power he gained, the more he realized that this wasn't just about strength, it was about trust. It was about connection. Sasuke turned away, his form stiff with anger. "I'll surpass you, Naruto," he muttered under his breath. "Just you wait." As Sasuke walked off, Naruto stood frozen, his sword still in hand. The fight had been over in a matter of seconds, but the lingering tension between them was much more complex. Sasuke's words had struck a chord within him, a reminder of the rift that was growing between them. Naruto's gaze drifted down to the sword in his hands. The power he had gained, this sun breathing, could it really drive him further away from his friends? He had wanted to be the one who saved them, the one who protected everyone. But in his pursuit of strength, was he unknowingly pushing them all away? His thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. "Naruto." He turned to see Sakura standing a few feet away, her face conflicted. "Are you okay?" Naruto smiled weakly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah. I'm fine." Sakura seemed unconvinced, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she gave him a small, concerned smile. "Just be careful, okay? Strength is important, but it's not everything." Naruto nodded, but inside, he was conflicted. The path ahead was uncertain, and the weight of his growing power felt heavier with each passing day. He knew he couldn't walk this path alone, but with Sasuke's challenge burning in his heart and a fear of losing everything he held dear, Naruto had to face the truth. His journey to mastery was only just beginning. And with it, he was forced to confront not only the power within him but the relationships that could either make him stronger or tear him apart. The days passed with Naruto's training growing ever more intense. Each breath he took, each movement he made, seemed to bring him closer to a deeper understanding of the sun-breathing technique. The ancient scroll, now tattered and well-worn, had become his constant companion. It wasn't just a manual for combat, it had become a guide to his very soul. Naruto's new technique, the second form, Clear Blue Sky, was no longer just a fiery slash. It had become an extension of himself, a reflection of his inner strength and focus. But as he began to master this, the scroll hinted at deeper, more powerful techniques, ones that would push him to his limits in ways he hadn't anticipated. The first of these advanced forms was third form, Raging Sun. Described as a form that could unleash the full fury of the sun itself, it was a technique that required perfect synchronization between the user's breath and chakra. The technique demanded not just strength but a deep understanding of inner balance and focus. Naruto had already experienced the challenge of synchronizing his chakra and breath with sun breathing, but the third form pushed this to new extremes. The movements needed to summon this technique were incredibly precise. Each strike was a calculated release of energy, building upon itself to unleash a devastating wave of fiery power. At first, Naruto found himself unable to fully grasp the form. His chakra control was improving, but it wasn't enough to harness the sheer power required to execute the raging sun. He would swing his sword, only for a burst of unrefined energy to erupt in all directions, scorching the ground around him and leaving him exhausted. It was frustrating. He felt as though he was so close, but every attempt left him winded and unsure. After several failed attempts, he collapsed against a tree, panting heavily. The energy of the sun still hummed within him, restless and untapped. Naruto stared at the sword in his hand, feeling a non sense of connection to it. The blade had been forged by the gods themselves, and he was its new wielder. But how could he control something so powerful? "Why is this so difficult?" he muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. A voice answered him, soft, yet clear. "Because you're not ready?" Naruto's eyes widened. He looked around, but there was no one nearby. The voice had come from deep within him, a strange, guiding presence that felt both unfamiliar and deeply comforting. It was the sword, the spirit of the blade, speaking to him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "The sun breathing is not just about strength, Naruto," the voice continued, its tone calm and wise. "It's about harmony. To control this power, you must first master yourself." Naruto gripped the sword tighter, feeling the warmth radiating from it. It was as if the blade itself was alive, responding to his emotions, his desires. The more he pushed, the more it resisted. But the voice reminded him that this was not a path of brute force. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The sun's energy coursed through him, not just through his body, but through his very being. He had been trying to force the power out, but perhaps it was time to stop fighting against it. Maybe it was time to let the power flow with him, rather than against him. As he exhaled slowly, Naruto centered himself, letting the chaotic thoughts in his mind settle. The fire burning within him was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelming. He could feel the connection between himself, the blade, and the sun itself. It was a delicate balance, one that he had to nurture, not conquer. He raised his sword, slowly and deliberately, taking a deep, steadying breath. As he did, the energy within him began to synchronize with the blade, the fiery aura of the raging sun swirling around the edge of the blade. This time, when he swung the sword, the air didn't erupt in uncontrolled energy. Instead, a focused beam of scorching light shot forward in a controlled arc, splitting the air with the intensity of a raging sun. The technique had worked. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was the first step toward truly mastering it. Naruto felt a surge of pride, but also a deeper sense of understanding. Sun breathing wasn't just a technique, it was a spiritual journey. Each form wasn't just about fighting, but about confronting his inner self, refining his resolve, and finding balance. Naruto collapsed to his knees, exhausted but satisfied. He had taken the next step on his journey. His chakra was in harmony with his breath, and the sword was an extension of his very being. But even as he reveled in his progress, there was a deeper realization: this power came with responsibility. The sword hummed softly in his hand, almost as if it were acknowledging his success. Yet, as he stared at the blade, another form in the scroll caught his attention. The fourth form, Burning Bones, Summer Sun, was described as a technique of overwhelming force, capable of incinerating everything in its path. It was said to be so powerful that it could burn through even the strongest of defenses, reducing everything to ash. Naruto felt a strange pull toward it, a desire to master this technique. But something in the back of his mind cautioned him. Was he ready for this? Despite his doubts, he couldn't ignore the temptation. He had already come this far, and with each step, He felt the sun's power growing within him. It felt like destiny calling to him, urging him to push beyond his limits. The next day, after a restless night of contemplation, Naruto began his training for the fourth form. He had already mastered the basic movements, but the true challenge lay in the control needed to unleash the full force of the technique. The Burning Bones, Summer Sun was not just about raw strength that required a delicate balance between power and restraint. If he lost control, the destruction could be catastrophic. The scroll described the form as a dance fluid, graceful, yet devastating. The user must channel the sun's energy through their body in a way that made every movement feel natural, yet powerful. Naruto began his training with the basics, aligning his breath, centering his chakra, and performing the basic stances. He moved slowly at first, not wanting to make any rushed movements. With every breath, he could feel the power of the sun growing inside him, radiating outward. His sword became a conduit for this energy, the blade glowing with a fiery intensity. It was like he was dancing with the very essence of the sun itself, sweeping his sword in wide arcs, building energy with every movement. He could feel the heat in the air, the power gathering in the space around him. And then, without warning, he struck. The sword flared with light, and the ground before him exploded in a wave of burning energy. The air around him crackled as the heat intensified, and Naruto had to take a step back, his chest heaving with the effort. It had worked, but the power was uncontrolled, spilling out in every direction like a wildfire. Naruto's breath came in shallow gasps as he watched the destruction around him. The ground where the technique had struck was scorched black, and the trees in the distance had been reduced to smoldering husks. The force of the blast had left a massive crater in the earth, its edges still glowing with the after effects of the heat. Maybe I'm not ready, Naruto muttered to himself. He sat down, the sword still glowing in his hand. It was clear that while he had unlocked the technique, he didn't yet have full control over it. He had to learn restraint. He had to understand that power, when unchecked, could lead to destruction not just of his enemies, but of everything around him. As Naruto sat in silence, feeling the sun's warmth pulse through him, he realized something important. Sun breathing was not just about power. It was about understanding the balance between destruction and creation. It was about finding peace in the chaos, just as the sun's rays brought life to the world even as they burned. And in that moment, Naruto understood that his journey was far from over. To truly master sun breathing, he would have to confront more than just his physical limitations. He would have to confront the darkness within himself, the fear that the more powerful he became, the further he would drift from the people he cared about. But if he could master that balance, if he could find peace in the dance of the sun, then he could be the protector he had always wanted to be. And, maybe, just maybe, he could save the very bonds he feared losing. With this newfound resolve, Naruto stood and wiped the sweat from his brow. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. He gripped the sword tightly, the sun's energy radiating from him in a steady, controlled rhythm. The journey to mastering the dance of the sun had only just begun, and Naruto was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The atmosphere in Konoha was electric. The Chunin exams had begun, and the village was teeming with excitement. It wasn't every day that ninja from all over the world gathered in the Hidden Leaf for a competition to determine the next generation of leaders. This year, the competition was especially intense. Not only was it a showcase of strength and skill, but it was also a testing ground for the future of the shinobi world. Naruto stood at the entrance of the arena, the familiar feeling of nerves bubbling in his stomach. This wasn't just any Chunin exams for him. He had been training harder than ever before, unlocking new powers with sun breathing. He had kept his progress secret from everyone, his friends, his teammates, even the senseis, but now, he was about to step into the spotlight. No longer the scrappy underdog, Naruto was ready to show the world just how much he had changed. As his team lined up, Sasuke shot him a quick glance, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something that hinted at rivalry. Sakura, ever the optimist, smiled at him encouragingly. But Naruto's mind was far from them. He was focused on the fight ahead. This was his time to prove that he was more than a boy they all once underestimated. The first round of the Chunin exams was set in the arena, and the crowd buzzed in anticipation. The participants were assigned their first opponents, and Naruto's name was called. He stood up, wiping his palms on his pants, and walked toward the center of the arena. His opponent, a tall, muscular boy with a scar running across his face, smirked at him, clearly underestimating Naruto based on his appearance. "You ready to lose, kid?" The opponent taunted, cracking his knuckles. Naruto said nothing, his expression calm, but inside, his heart pounded with the weight of his decision. He had trained for this moment, but he had also chosen not to reveal too much too soon. Sun breathing was still something he had to perfect. It was too powerful to wield recklessly. So, he would have to be strategic, careful in how he used it. The announcer signaled for the match to begin, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Naruto's opponent charged at him with incredible speed, his fists aimed directly at Naruto's face. It was the typical approach of a brawler, brute force and aggression. But Naruto's reflexes were sharper than ever, thanks to the clear blue sky technique that allowed him to slice through the air with precision. As his opponent swung a massive fist, Naruto sidestepped smoothly, his sword moving in a single, controlled arc. The blade cut through the air, producing a flash of heat, and the raging sun was born. The fiery slash split the air like a roaring wave of destruction, aimed directly at the man's torso. The crowd gasped as the flames erupted from Naruto's sword, burning the opponent's clothing and forcing him to jump back in panic. His shirt was scorched, and the intense heat left him gasping for breath. But before he could react, Naruto was already in motion, his feet light and his movements graceful. The opponent had no time to recover as Naruto's clear blue sky struck again, a horizontal slash that sent a shockwave of fiery energy across the arena. The audience was left speechless as the opponent was sent tumbling backwards, smoke rising from the burns that marred his body. He struggled to stand, his movements sluggish. Naruto, his expression still focused but tinged with a trace of worry, stood poised, the blade at his side, waiting for the next move. The announcer called the match. Naruto had won. He didn't celebrate, but instead, he returned to his side of the arena, head held high. He had shown restraint, but his power was undeniable. It was the first time anyone had seen the true extent of his abilities. The way he moved, the way he wielded his sword, it wasn't just strength, it was an art. The spectators were silent for a moment, before the murmurs began. The cages in the VIP section exchanged glances. Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, raised an eyebrow in surprise. Her eyes narrowed as she observed Naruto closely. The sun-breathing techniques were unlike anything she had seen in the shinobi world before. There was a distinct power about him, an ancient energy that resonated beyond just chakra. But it was Orochimaru who was the most intrigued. From the shadows of the VIP section, the former Leaf Shinobi studied Naruto with intense interest. He had been following Naruto's rise for a while now, and this display of strength had confirmed something he'd suspected for some time. The power Naruto wielded wasn't ordinary. It was something far beyond what most shinobi could comprehend. This boy could be a useful tool, Orochimaru thought with a dark smirk. He had seen power like this before, but not in someone so young, someone so untapped. If he could harness Naruto's abilities for his own purposes, he would have a weapon far stronger than anything the shinobi world had ever seen. Back in the arena, Naruto barely had time to catch his breath before his next opponent was called. This time, his opponent was a young woman, calm and composed, with short, dark hair and a calculating gaze. She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Naruto. "Impressive," she said, her voice steady. "But let's see if you can keep up with me." Naruto nodded, acknowledging her challenge. As the match began, he kept his movements more controlled. His opponent was quick and nimble, using a mix of taijutsu and genjutsu to try and disorient him. But Naruto's heightened senses, a gift from his training with sun breathing, allowed him to anticipate her every move. She launched herself at him, spinning in the air with a series of rapid kicks. Naruto countered with ease, parrying her strikes with the flat of his blade, his focus sharp. He wasn't just using raw strength, he was moving with fluidity, like the sun itself, calm, yet capable of intense force. It didn't take long for the woman to realize that she couldn't match Naruto's speed and precision. With a final, graceful move, Naruto unleashed the raging sun again, the fiery arc of energy striking her before she could react. She was knocked out of the arena, cinched and panting, but alive. The crowd was stunned. 2 matches, 2 victories, both marked by raw power and unmatched skill. But what the audience didn't realize was the toll these techniques were taking on Naruto. Sun breathing wasn't just physical, it required spiritual harmony and control, and with each use, Naruto could feel his own energy being drained. He walked off the arena floor, his body covered in sweat, his breathing heavy. Sasuke, who had been observing the matches, couldn't hide his surprise. His eyes flickered with a hint of envy and frustration. Sasuke had always seen himself as the strongest in the group, the one who would surpass everyone else. But now, Naruto had surpassed him in a way he hadn't expected. Naruto caught Sasuke's gaze and offered a brief, nonchalant smile. It wasn't a taunt, but a simple acknowledgement. Sasuke, however, wasn't in the mood for camaraderie. His fists clenched at his sides. How is he doing this? How is he getting stronger while I struggle to keep up? Sasuke thought bitterly. As Naruto made his way to the sidelines, he noticed Hinata watching him. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with admiration. She had always been quietly supportive of him, but now, she looked at him with a mix of awe and something deeper, something Naruto wasn't sure he could name. After the match ended, Naruto's thoughts began to wander. He had proven himself on the battlefield, but there was something more brewing beneath the surface. The Chunin exams were far from over, and the competition was only getting started. Naruto had no idea what would come next, but he knew one thing for sure: he was no longer the underdog. He was a force to be reckoned with, and some of the most dangerous people in the world were starting to notice him. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed as he watched Naruto from afar. His interest had been piqued, but there was still much more to learn. Orochimaru had never been one to leave things to chance. If Naruto was the key to something greater, he would make sure to take advantage of it. The days following Naruto's performance in the Chunin exams were filled with a strange mix of triumph and uncertainty. While the village hailed his victories, Naruto himself couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Every time he held the sword, a strange sensation passed through him, a subtle warmth, like the gentle touch of the sun itself. But it was more than that. There was a force, a deep well of energy, that called to him from within the blade. He had been practicing tirelessly in secret, honing his sun-breathing techniques in the hopes of mastering each form, each movement. With every strike of the sword, Naruto could feel his connection to it grow stronger. The blade had become an extension of himself. At times, it felt as though the sword was guiding him, not the other way around. It was during one of these intense training sessions, late in the evening, that the sword did something unexpected. As Naruto practiced the fifth form, flame dance, a technique requiring precise control of energy and movement, the sword began to hum with an intensity he had never felt before. His breath caught in his throat as the blade seemed to pulse with a life of its own, radiating an intense heat that made the air shimmer around him. The faint whispers in his mind grew louder, more distinct, as though the sword was trying to speak. He stopped mid-swing, holding the blade out in front of him, his hands trembling. The heat from the blade was almost unbearable, but Naruto didn't drop it. Instead, he let it happen, listening to the whispers, letting them wash over him. "You are the chosen one," a voice, not his own, resonated inside his mind. It was deep, ancient, and powerful. Naruto's heart raced. He had always felt a deep connection to the sword, but this was different. It wasn't just a tool, it was alive. Or at least, it had a consciousness of its own. The visions began then, flashes of ancient battles, warriors from ages past wielding the same blade. He saw a man, bathed in golden light, his sword cutting through armies with effortless grace. He saw the sun itself swirling around the blade, fueling it with immense energy, turning it into a weapon of destruction and light. There was a sense of overwhelming power, a force of nature that Naruto could scarcely comprehend. The blade is a gift, the voice continued. A gift bestowed upon you by the celestial being who commands the sun itself. You must learn to wield it, or it will consume you. Naruto gripped the sword tighter, his knuckles turning white. The heat from the blade intensified, but it didn't burn him. It was as if the sword had accepted him, and now it was willing to share its power. But Naruto knew there was more to this than just strength. What do you mean, consume me? Naruto thought desperately, hoping the sword would answer. The voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency to it. The power within you is vast, but unrefined. Like the sun, it can give life or destroy it. The blade is a reflection of your spirit, your will. If you lose control, the power will burn not only your enemies but you as well. Naruto nodded, though he wasn't sure if the sword could actually see him. He felt a strange sense of responsibility now. This wasn't just about him anymore. The sword held a force far beyond his understanding. It was a weapon, yes, but it was also a key one that could either save or destroy. The next few days were a blur of training and introspection. Naruto worked with the sword constantly, pushing himself to master each of the forms of sun breathing while also trying to understand the deeper connection between himself and the weapon. He had no idea what the celestial being was, or why it had chosen him, but he knew one thing for certain: the sword was far more than a mere tool. It was a part of him. But despite his progress, the darkness within him, his anger, his fear of being abandoned still gnawed at him. He was no longer the naive child who craved attention and approval, but the weight of his past still lingered. And now, with the power of the sword awakening, he wondered if he would ever be able to control it completely. It wasn't long before Naruto's trials would test his control over the blade. The mission came at an unexpected time. Naruto had been walking through the village after a day of training when he received word that a small village near Konoha had been attacked by a group of rogue mercenaries. The mission was simple: investigate the village's condition, eliminate any threats, and report back. But as Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura set out to investigate, none of them knew the full extent of what awaited them. The village was in ruins, homes burned to the ground, the air thick with smoke. As they advanced cautiously, Sasuke's sharp eyes noticed movement in the distance. A group of 5 mercenaries, heavily armed and clearly expecting trouble, was waiting for them. Naruto's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He didn't know what these mercenaries wanted, but he wasn't going to let them harm the villagers. The mercenaries saw them approaching and immediately drew their weapons. One of them, a tall man with a jagged scar across his face, sneered at Naruto and his team. Another group of rookies, he growled. Let's see if you can handle real combat. Sasuke stepped forward, his Sharingan activated, ready to take on the leader. Sakura, her expression determined, prepared for battle as well. But Naruto stayed back, watching the mercenaries carefully. He knew this would be his test. His heart raced with the knowledge that he couldn't hold back anymore. Before anyone could make the first move, the scarred man raised his hand, signaling the attack. With a burst of speed, the mercenaries charged. Sasuke immediately engaged, his sword clashing against one of the mercenaries with deadly precision. Sakura fought alongside him, using her enhanced strength to take down another enemy. But Naruto stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the sword in his hand. The blade hummed, resonating with his spirit. Without consciously thinking about it, he raised the sword and took a deep breath. The familiar warmth filled his chest, and he activated first form, dance. In an instant, the air around him heated up, the very atmosphere becoming charged with energy. As Naruto swung the sword, flames erupted from the blade, twisting and spiraling outward in a fiery arc. The mercenaries who had been charging at him froze in place as they were suddenly engulfed by the flames. The sword's power, something beyond his own control, had unleashed a torrent of heat so intense that it seemed to warp the air around them. The mercenaries screamed as the flames consumed them. It wasn't just the heat, it was as though the sword itself was alive, feeding off Naruto's emotions, burning with an intensity that reflected his inner turmoil. His breath came in shallow gasps as he watched the flames consume his enemies, their forms disappearing into the inferno. The fire raged, growing higher, hotter, until the air around him seemed to shimmer. And then, as quickly as it had come, the flames receded. The mercenaries were gone, reduced to ashes. Naruto stood in the middle of the scorched earth, his body trembling with the after effects of the power he had unleashed. The sword in his hand glowed faintly, its heat slowly fading away. Sasuke and Sakura were silent, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and disbelief. Sasuke's eyes flickered toward Naruto, his gaze filled with a newfound wariness. Sakura's voice was soft but filled with concern. "Naruto, what was that?" Naruto could barely speak. His hands still gripped the sword, but his entire body felt like it was on fire. The power he had just used, it wasn't something he had controlled. It had been the sword. The flames had come from within it, not from his own chakra. He had barely been able to stop them. "You must learn control," the voice of the sword whispered in his mind again. "This power is not yours to command. It commands you." Naruto swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the charred ground where his enemies had once stood. The power of the sword was beyond anything he had ever known. And now, he realized just how much he still had to learn. As his teammates approached, Naruto felt a cold chill run down his spine. This power, this weapon, wasn't something he could take lightly. It was both a blessing and a curse. And as he looked up at the horizon, Naruto knew his journey was far from over. There were still many battles to come, many trials to face. But with each step, he could feel the sword's power growing, pushing him toward something greater. Something dangerous. The weight of the sword had become heavier with each passing day, not in the sense of its physical mass, but in the way it seemed to draw upon his soul. The flames it unleashed in battle had been both a blessing and a curse, a testament to its power, but also a reminder of its dangers. Each time Naruto trained, each time he fought, the sword would grow warmer, resonating with his emotions, testing his resolve. Despite his victories, despite the confidence he gained from mastering sun breathing, Naruto knew that he had only begun to scratch the surface of what the sword truly represented. It wasn't just a weapon, it was an ancient artifact, a divine instrument that held a deeper purpose. A purpose that, as he soon realized, wasn't fully revealed to him yet. The vision of his enemies turned to ash haunted him. That power had felt overwhelming, uncontrollable, and it terrified him. He needed answers. The journey to find them led him far from Kanata, across mountains, through forests, and overseas. His destination was the Land of Iron, a place known for its ancient samurai traditions and its revered blacksmiths. It was here, in a remote village, that Naruto had heard rumors of a sage, a legendary elder who had knowledge of sacred weapons. The sword, as he learned from the whispers of other wanderers, was more than just a blade forged by mortal hands. It had a history, a divine connection. If anyone could help him understand its true purpose, it would be this elder. Naruto's path was long and exhausting, but it felt necessary. With each step, he could feel the sword growing more restless, as though it, too, sought something. What that something was, Naruto didn't know. But he was determined to find out. Finally, after days of traveling, Naruto arrived at the Land of Iron, a land where the wind always seemed to carry the scent of iron and forge fires. The village was small but known for its great warriors, and nestled at the heart of the village stood a humble dojo. There, he was introduced to the elder, a wizened man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. His name was Tetsuo, a retired master samurai who had dedicated his life to preserving the ancient ways of the sword. As Naruto presented the blade to him, Tetsuo's eyes widened, and for a moment, there was an unmistakable tension in the air. The elder's hands trembled as he took the sword, examining its blade, feeling the heat that emanated from it. "Where did you find this?" Tetsuo's voice was calm, but there was an urgency to it. Naruto hesitated for a moment before answering. "In Kanata, in an old scroll. I've been training with it, and with sun breathing. But I don't fully understand it. It's too much for me. It feels like the sword has a will of its own. Tetsuo nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the blade once more. This sword is no mere weapon. It is the Akatsuki blade, forged by the sun god himself. It has been passed down through generations, but only those with a pure spirit, free from the darkness of their heart, can wield its full power. Naruto's heart skipped a beat. The sun god? He had heard rumors, legends about divine weapons, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He needed to know more. What do you mean, pure spirit? Naruto asked, his voice full of confusion and growing curiosity. I don't understand. I've been training hard, but it's like the sword is always pushing me. It feels like it wants something from me. The elder's eyes softened as he studied Naruto. The sword has chosen you, Naruto Uzumaki. Not because you are the strongest, nor the most skilled. It chose you because you possess something that many warriors lack, a heart full of potential, one that hasn't yet been tainted by pride or hatred. You have struggled with your past, but you haven't given in to the darkness. That is what makes you worthy. Naruto felt a strange weight in the elder's words. He had always fought for recognition, to be seen as more than just the demon fox inside him. He had always longed for acceptance, to be a hero. But could his spirit really be pure? Could he, with all his inner turmoil, truly embody the spirit of this ancient sword? The elder, sensing Naruto's doubts, placed a hand on his shoulder. To wield the Akatsuki blade, you must first confront your inner struggles. The sword does not just amplify the strength of its wielder, it reflects their soul. If you cannot control your darkness, it will consume you. Naruto nodded sullenly, taking in the gravity of Tetsuo's words. He had always fought outwardly, against enemies, against the world. But now, it seemed the true battle was internal. He wasn't just learning to master the sword's power, he was learning to master himself. Tetsuo led Naruto to a secluded area near the dojo, an ancient training ground that had once belonged to the greatest samurai of the Land of Iron. The air here was thick with history, the ground scarred by countless battles fought over centuries. The elder handed Naruto a worn scroll, different from the one he had found in Kanata. This is a training manual, Tetsuo explained. It contains the ancient techniques of the Solar Awakening, the next step in your training. This technique is not just a physical one, it is a spiritual trial. You must unlock the full potential of the Akatsuki blade by synchronizing your breath, your will, and your heart with the sun itself. Naruto unrolled the scroll and scanned the intricate symbols and descriptions. The Solar Awakening was a technique that required total focus, perfect alignment of one's chakra and breath with the sun's energy. But it was more than just breathing or fighting, it was a communion with the divine flame that powered the blade. The elder's voice interrupted his thoughts. This is the final step. The sword will test your resolve. The Solar Awakening is a test of your spirit. If your heart falters, the flames will scorch you. But if you succeed, you will awaken a power unlike any other. Naruto understood what was at stake. His training had brought him far, but this was the ultimate challenge. He had come to the Land of Iron to understand the sword, but more than that, he had come to understand himself. For 3 days and nights, Naruto trained relentlessly. The air around him was thick with pressure as he focused on synchronizing his breathing with the movements of the sun. Tetsuo watched from a distance, his eyes never leaving Naruto. Each form Naruto performed was a challenge, his muscles burned with exhaustion. His mind screamed for relief, but he pressed on, determined to prove his worth. On the 4th day, the breakthrough came. As the first rays of the morning sun broke over the horizon, Naruto stood at the center of the training field. His breathing was slow and steady, the heat of the sun already beginning to resonate with his spirit. He felt the warmth, but it wasn't just the sun, this warmth came from within him. The sword hummed in his hand, and Naruto knew that the moment had arrived. His movements were fluid, his body becoming a conduit for the sun's energy. His breath synchronized with the rising sun, each inhale and exhale a step closer to unlocking the Solar Awakening. The sword began to glow with a brilliant golden light, and for the first time, Naruto felt a connection that was beyond himself. He was not just wielding the sword, He was one with it. The power surged through him like a tidal wave, filling every part of his body with divine energy. His muscles burned with the intensity of the flame, but it wasn't pain, it was purification. His chakra flared, harmonizing with the sword's essence, and he felt the flames of the Akatsuki blade take on a new form, divine, righteous, and unstoppable. He opened his eyes and saw the world around him through a new lens. The air shimmered with heat, the ground beneath his feet radiating an aura of burning light. He had done it. He had awakened the true power of the Akatsuki blade. Tetsuo, his expression unreadable, approached Naruto. "You have done it," he said softly. "The solar awakening is the pinnacle of your training. But remember, this power is not for conquest, it is a force to protect. You must wield it with responsibility." Naruto nodded, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his breath. He felt more powerful than he ever had, but he also felt a deep sense of clarity. This power wasn't just for him, it was a gift, and with it came an even greater duty. "I understand," Naruto said, his voice steady. As he left the land of iron, the sword resting at his side, he knew his journey had only just begun. The true test lay ahead, and with the Akatsuki blade at his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges the world would throw his way. The sun itself had chosen him as its champion, and he would not falter. The sun rose over Konoha in the same way it always did, but for Naruto, the world beneath it had changed forever. His travels to the land of iron, his struggle, and his newfound connection to the Akatsuki blade had transformed him in ways he couldn't fully grasp. What he knew, however, was that he was no longer the boy who had once sought attention and respect. No longer the outcast with a demon sealed inside him. He was something more, something greater. The sword pulsed softly at his side, an extension of himself, its power now fully unlocked. Each time he held it, he could feel the immense, divine energy running through him, a power that was as much spiritual as it was physical. But it was still a challenge to control. Even now, despite his training, there were moments when the sword's power surged, and he could feel the weight of it pressing against his resolve. As he walked back through the village gates, the weight of all that had happened hung heavy on his shoulders. Konoha had changed since he left, as had he. The villagers regarded him with a mixture of awe and fear, whispering behind his back as he passed by. They no longer saw the boy who had been the village's punching bag, they saw the wielder of the Akatsuki blade, a figure of power who had returned as a potential savior or a future threat. Naruto's presence alone had become a paradox. To some, he was a beacon of hope, someone whose strength could shield Konoha from any enemy. To others, he was a ticking time bomb, too powerful, too unpredictable. Yet, Naruto remained focused on his own path. He had already faced the temptation of power, the lure of using the sword's divine flames for personal gain, for revenge, or for glory. But he had resisted. He had learned from his mentors, from the teachings of Tetsuo, and from his own experiences that strength without purpose was hollow. The Akatsuki blade had chosen him for a reason, and he had no intention of betraying its legacy. As he made his way to the Hokage's office to report his return, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he still needed to accomplish. The sword was a tool of immense power, yes, but it was also a symbol. And it was up to him to decide what that symbol would mean. Inside the Hokage's office, Kakashi looked up from his desk as Naruto entered, his mask hiding the surprise in his eyes. "Welcome back, Naruto," Kakashi greeted, his tone warmer than it had been in the past. "I trust your training was successful." Naruto gave a slight nod, but his eyes were intense, focused. "Yeah. But there's something I need to ask you about, Kakashi-sensei." "About what comes next?" Kakashi studied him carefully, his gaze flickering to the Akatsuki blade at Naruto's side. He could sense the change in the boy, the way his chakra radiated differently, the way his presence filled the room. It was as though the boy had transcended the limitations of a mere shinobi and had become something greater, something divine. "I've been training with this sword for months," Naruto continued, his voice steady. "I've learned everything I can. But there's still more. I need to understand what this power really means for me and for everyone else." Kakashi nodded slowly, the usual playful glint in his eye replaced by something more serious. The power of the Akatsuki blade is ancient, Naruto. It's not something that can be fully understood through just training. The sword's power comes from its connection to the sun god, a celestial force that transcends time and space. What you're wielding is not just a weapon, it's a piece of that power. Naruto's gaze hardened. He had already realized that much. The sword had never been just a weapon to him, it was an embodiment of the divine. But I need to know how to use it properly. I've unlocked so many techniques already, but it feels like there's still something left. Kakashi gave him a knowing look. The Akatsuki blade responds to the wielder's spirit. If you want to unlock its full potential, you must face your doubts, your fears, and your desires. You have to overcome the inner conflict that holds you back. Naruto frowned, processing the words. My doubts, hey. Yes, Kakashi said, rising from his desk and walking toward Naruto. Power is dangerous, Naruto. It can corrupt you if you're not careful. You must learn to control it not just physically, but mentally, and emotionally as well. The sword will reflect your heart. If you wield it for the wrong reasons, you could lose everything. Naruto tightened his grip on the sword's hilt, feeling the warmth radiating from the blade. It was as though the sword itself was alive, reacting to his emotions. For a moment, he thought of the village's fear of him, the power he had gained, and the temptation to use it. He had been given a gift, but there were times when that gift felt more like a burden. I understand, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said after a long pause. But I won't let this power control me. I won't let it turn me into something I'm not. Kakashi smiled slightly. Good. But remember, the path you're on is one that will test you in ways you can't even imagine. Stay true to your heart, Naruto. That's the key. With that, Naruto left the Hulkish's office, his thoughts swirling. He had faced many challenges before, but this one felt different. The power of the Akatsuki blade had changed him, but it hadn't defined him. He was still Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who refused to give up, who would protect his friends, and who dreamed of becoming Hokage. The sword was just a tool. His heart, his spirit, was what truly mattered. That night, after hours of meditation and self-reflection, Naruto returned to the training grounds. He unsheathed the Akatsuki blade, feeling the familiar warmth flood his body. It was time to push himself further, to perfect the final technique he had been working toward, the 8th form, Sunlight Sword. This attack, he knew, was the culmination of everything he had learned. It was his most powerful form, the ultimate expression of sun breathing, and it would test not only his strength but his resolve. As Naruto stood in the center of the training field, he closed his eyes and focused. The Akatsuki blade pulsed in his hand, its heat growing stronger. His chakra and breath synchronized with the sun, and in that moment, he felt a connection to the very core of his being. His resolve was unshakable. With a sharp breath, he raised the sword above his head. The blade shimmered in the moonlight, its golden aura crackling with power. As he brought it down in a sweeping arc, the ground beneath him seemed to tremble. The air itself ignited with the force of the strike, and a blinding flash of light erupted from the sword. The sunlight sword had been unleashed. For a moment, time itself seemed to stand still. The field was engulfed in light, and the energy from the strike radiated outward, turning the night sky into a fiery canvas. The attack left a massive crater in the earth, a testament to the power that had been released. Naruto stood there, breathing heavily, his body tingling from the after effects of the attack. He had done it. The sunlight sword was more than just a technique, it was a manifestation of everything he had become. The sword had chosen him because of his heart, his spirit, and his refusal to give in to darkness. And in that moment, Naruto realized that he wasn't just wielding a weapon, he was embodying the very essence of the sun itself. A beacon of hope, a force of purity in a world full of darkness. The Akatsuki blade had unlocked his potential, but it was his spirit that had allowed him to control it. As Naruto returned to the village, the people looked at him differently. Some with awe, others with fear, but all with a sense of respect. He had become Konoha's greatest protector, the one who stood against the darkness, wielding the divine flame of the sun. Naruto knew that this was only the beginning. The world was changing, and with it, his role in it. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready. The Akatsuki blade had forged him into something greater, something eternal. And he would carry that light with him, wherever he went. The sun had barely risen when Naruto set out on a routine mission with his team. The quiet morning was a stark contrast to the intensity of the days to come. His blade, the Akatsuki sword, rested at his side, the divine heat from the blade familiar against his hip. He had become a living symbol of power, but as time passed, he was beginning to sense the weight of his new life. His days of simply being Naruto Uzumaki, the mischievous orphan, seemed like a distant memory. The burden of his strength was settling in, and he was starting to feel the pressure of what it meant to hold such power. However, the quiet morning was about to turn into a battleground. As they ventured into a dense forest on the outskirts of Konoha to retrieve a rare herb, Naruto's senses tingled, and an eerie silence descended over the group. His sharp eyes scanned the surroundings as he placed a hand on the hilt of the Akatsuki sword, instinctively aware that they were not alone. "Something's wrong," Naruto muttered to his teammates, his voice barely a whisper. Sakura, standing beside him, furrowed her brow and looked around cautiously, while Sasuke remained tense, his hand instinctively drifting toward his kunai pouch. The ground beneath their feet rumbled suddenly, and from the shadows emerged a figure clad in dark robes. His pale face, framed by long, black hair, revealed a chilling grin. Orochimaru. Naruto's eyes narrowed, recognizing the legendary robed ninja immediately. "Orochimaru," he hissed, fingers curling tighter around the sword's hilt. "What do you want?" Orochimaru's grin widened, his eyes glinting with a dangerous curiosity. "Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice silky smooth, "I've been watching you. You've come into contact with something extraordinary, haven't you? That sword, the Akatsuki blade. I've been waiting for you to reveal its secrets." Naruto stepped forward, his body brimming with tension. "You're not getting anywhere near it, Orochimaru. The blade is mine." Orochimaru's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly, the serpent-like gleam in them never leaving. But you misunderstand. You're only a vessel, Naruto. A vessel chosen to wield its power, but not truly understanding it. Allow me to show you how much more you could be, if only you'd join me." Naruto's eyes hardened, the air around him charged with a fiery aura. "I'm not interested in your offer. I'd never side with someone like you." With a flick of his wrist, Orochimaru summoned a serpent from the ground. The snake's tongue flickered in the air as it lunged toward Naruto. Before it could strike, Naruto's hand was already on the hilt of the Akatsuki blade, drawing it with incredible speed. The serpent's strike was met by a fiery slash that cleaved through the air, slicing the creature in half as if it were nothing more than paper. Sakura gasped, but Sasuke's expression remained stoic, though his eyes held a flicker of something deeper, a mix of awe and jealousy. "You're not the only one who's learned to wield a blade, Naruto," Orochimaru said, his voice low and menacing. His hands made quick, precise seals, and suddenly, dozens of serpents erupted from the ground, surrounding the team in an instant. "Get back!" Naruto shouted, instinctively stepping forward to protect his teammates. He inhaled deeply, channeling the sun-breathing techniques he had perfected over the last few months. The warmth of the Akatsuki blade surged through him, empowering his movements as he prepared to unleash one of his most powerful techniques. First form, dance. Naruto's sword flashed in the air like a comet, cutting through the serpents with a precision that left no room for error. The flames emanating from the sword were pure, scorching, and radiant, reducing the serpents to ash in seconds. But Orochimaru was undeterred. His face twisted into a smirk as he appeared in front of Naruto with unnatural speed, his hands outstretched, chakras surging. Naruto's eyes widened as he realized the danger. Orochimaru was no mere opponent. His ability to manipulate his body and his dark techniques made him a fearsome adversary. But Naruto was determined to protect what was his and to keep Orochimaru from taking the Akatsuki blade. Second form, clear blue sky. Naruto called out, swinging his sword horizontally with impeccable precision. The blade's fiery arc cut through the air, leaving a trail of blue flame in its wake, and Orochimaru was forced to retreat, his body twisting unnaturally to avoid the strike. Naruto didn't give him any respite. He advanced, his movements swift and fluid, an unstoppable force powered by the sun itself. Sun's wrath, he shouted, the words ringing with authority. The ground trembled beneath Naruto's feet as the Akatsuki blade glowed with an intensity that eclipsed the daylight. A massive, blistering wave of flame erupted from the sword, expanding outward like a solar flare. The heat was unbearable, the flames searing everything in their path. The robed shinobi, unable to withstand the onslaught, were consumed in a firestorm, their screams fading into the inferno. Orochimaru's eyes widened as he watched the sheer power of Naruto's attack. The flames subsided, leaving a scorched and smoking battlefield. Naruto stood amidst the ruin, breathing heavily, his eyes blazing with the fire of determination. Well, that's one way to deal with it, Naruto muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He could feel the weight of the battle, but he knew he had won. For now. Orochimaru, however, wasn't done. He stood at the edge of the battlefield, his face a mask of frustration and intrigue. Impressive, Naruto. But I've seen enough. You're not ready for the full power of the Akatsuki blade yet. But I will be. Mark my words, boy. The sun will burn and I will be there to harness its power. With that, Orochimaru disappeared into the shadows, his serpentine form vanishing without a trace. The battle was over, but the ominous threat lingered. Naruto stood still, the Akatsuki blade still crackling with the last remnants of flame. He knew this was far from over. Orochimaru's interest in him wasn't something to be taken lightly. The robed ninja wasn't interested in just Naruto's power, he wanted the Akatsuki blade, a weapon that could reshape the world. And he would stop at nothing to obtain it. As Naruto sheathed his sword and turned to his teammates, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battles ahead would only get more dangerous. Orochimaru had already proven how far he was willing to go for power. Naruto couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now, not ever. I'm fine, Sakura, Naruto said, his voice calm but tinged with a determination that was hard to ignore. He glanced at Sasuke, who said nothing but stood with a watchful eye, his mind undoubtedly racing with thoughts of his own strength. We need to get back to Konoha, Naruto added, his expression hardening. We've got work to do. As they made their way back to the village, Naruto felt the weight of what had transpired. Orochimaru had retreated, but the danger was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Naruto couldn't help but feel the growing target on his back. His power, his sword had drawn the attention of one of the most dangerous men in the world. And as much as Naruto had learned to harness the strength of the Akatsuki blade, he knew that he was only beginning to understand the true cost of such power. But one thing was certain, he would never back down. The sun had chosen him, and he would carry its flame until the very end. The days following Naruto's clash with Orochimaru passed in a blur. The village buzzed with whispers of his strength, and as rumors spread across the shinobi world, a ripple effect soon followed. Everywhere he went, he was met with a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity. His power, which had once been a private secret, was now an undeniable force that could not be ignored. The Akatsuki blade and his sun-breathing techniques had proven themselves beyond any shadow of a doubt, and the world took notice. The five great shinobi countries Konoha, Suna, Kiri, Iwa, and Kumo began to stir with unease. Alliances and rivalries that had long remained stable were beginning to fray. The small, isolated conflicts simmering beneath the surface began to boil over, and Naruto's existence was at the heart of it all. In some villages, his power was seen as an incredible asset, something to be coveted and harnessed. In others, it was viewed as a threat, a dangerous weapon that needed to be contained or destroyed before it could grow too strong. Whispers filled the streets of Konoha as the elders convened to discuss the ramifications of Naruto's growing power. The village's leadership knew that their next move was crucial. For years, the Hokage had led them through wars, betrayals, and disasters, But now a new threat and asset, perhaps, but also a potential liability had emerged in the form of Naruto Uzumaki. But no matter how the village elders debated, one thing became clear: something had to be done. The rising tensions among the villages could no longer be ignored. A summit was called the Five-Cage Summit. It was time for Naruto to face the leaders of the other villages, to prove that he could control his immense power and that he was not a threat to the fragile peace that still existed between the shinobi nations. It was also his opportunity to prove to the cages that he wasn't merely a weapon or a tool to be wielded by any one country. The true test was before him: to rise above the shadows of doubt and fear and stand as a symbol of unity, a force that could bring balance instead of destruction. The day of the summit arrived with an air of tension hanging over the entire village. The Hokage's office was abuzz with activity as the time drew near for Naruto's departure. Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, was pacing restlessly behind her desk, her brow furrowed in thought. She had always seen potential in Naruto, but the sudden surge in his strength had caught even her off guard. "Naruto, come here," Tsunade called as Naruto entered her office, wearing his usual confident expression. His casual demeanor seemed to hide the weight of the responsibility that was now placed on his shoulders. Naruto bowed his head slightly, but his eyes were determined. "What's up, Bahn?" Tsunade gave him a pointed look, her stern gaze not softened by his informal greeting. "The summit will be held soon. Are you prepared for it?" Naruto nodded, but his expression was conflicted. "Yeah, I'm ready, but I still don't get why I need to go to this thing. Why not just send the Hokage and let me keep training? They already know I'm not going to be a problem." Tsunade's eyes softened as she regarded him. "It's not just about proving that you're not a problem, Naruto. It's about showing them what you can bring to the table, what kind of force you truly are. You're not just Konoha's hero anymore, you're a symbol of power that the entire shinobi world is watching." Naruto's gaze grew distant as he considered her words. The weight of it all was settling in. He had always fought for recognition, for respect, but now he had the power to shape the future of the entire world. The responsibility was overwhelming, and he wasn't sure how to navigate this new path. But he was certain of one thing: he wasn't going to let anyone use him. He would choose his own path, whether the world liked it or not. "I'll prove that I'm not a weapon for anyone," Naruto said, his voice firm. "I'm doing this for Konoha, for the future." The summit took place in a neutral location, the Land of Iron, where the ancient samurai had once ruled. The stark, cold surroundings contrasted with the heated atmosphere as Naruto and Tsunade arrived. The five Kage stood in their imposing robes, each exuding authority and power, their faces stoic and unreadable. Gaara, the Kaze Kage, watched Naruto carefully, his expression serious but not unkind. Meiterumi, the Mizu Kage, seemed to regard him with a curious mixture of interest and wariness. Oniki, the Tsuchikage, had a skeptical look on his face, while the Raikage, stood tall and imposing, his gaze locked onto Naruto as if appraising him. As Tsunade and Naruto approached the gathering, the room fell silent. The Kage's eyes shifted to Naruto, some with admiration, others with suspicion. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Tsunade stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Thank you all for gathering here today. As you know, we are here to discuss Naruto Uzumaki and his role in the future of the shinobi world." As spoke first, his deep voice resonating with authority. Naruto Uzumaki. A name that has become a symbol of both fear and hope. The rumors of his power are not to be taken lightly. The sword he wields, the Akatsuki blade, the fire techniques he has mastered. These are not the skills of an ordinary shinobi. I have no doubt that he's a powerful asset, but I must ask, can we trust him? Naruto stepped forward, his posture straight and his eyes unwavering as he addressed the Kages. "I'm not here to start wars. I'm not here to conquer. But I won't stand by while others use me as a tool. My power is mine, and I'll use it however I see fit. If you want to judge me by my strength, that's your choice. But I'll show you that I can be a force for good." Gaara's voice cut through the tension. "I understand what you mean, Naruto. I've had my own share of struggles with power. But it's not just about strength, it's about what we do with it. If you wish to prove that you can be a stabilizing force, then you must show us that you can work alongside us, not against us. Oniki snorted, his skepticism still evident. Words are cheap, young man. You may say that now, but power corrupts. I have lived long enough to see how easily ambition turns to violence. The question is not whether you will wield that power but when. Naruto's eyes hardened, his voice unwavering. I'm not like the others you've seen. I know what it's like to be used. I won't let that happen again. The room fell silent for a long moment, the weight of Naruto's words hanging in the air. Then, Mai Terumi spoke, her voice calm but firm. I think we can all agree that Naruto's power cannot be ignored. But we also need to consider how to move forward. An alliance, perhaps? Tsunade nodded, adding, yes. An alliance. Naruto has proven his strength, and Konoha stands by him. We believe that he can be an asset to all of us, but all lead if we work together. The cages exchanged looks, and after what seemed like an eternity, A stepped forward, his eyes narrowed but not unkind. Fine. We'll form an alliance. But make no mistake, Naruto Uzumaki will be watching. If you stray from the path you've promised to walk, we will not hesitate to take action. Naruto bowed deeply, his resolve unwavering. I won't fail you. I promise. As Naruto and Tsunade left the summit, the air felt different, charged with a new kind of tension. The world was watching, and Naruto knew that this was only the beginning. The five Kage had reluctantly agreed to an alliance, but their trust in him was still fragile. He couldn't afford to falter now. His strength had placed him in the center of a storm, and he would need to navigate it carefully. But Naruto had always been a fighter, and no matter what came next, he would face it head-on. And deep down, he knew that the true test of his power was still to come. The peace that had settled over the world after the Five Kage Summit was short-lived. Though the leaders of the shinobi nations had agreed on an alliance, the shadows of their old fears and ambitions never truly vanished. From the hidden corners of the world, a new threat began to stir, one that had long been a silent predator, watching from the darkness. The Akatsuki. It was a name that struck fear into the hearts of many. A group of rogue ninjas with deadly abilities, bound by their own twisted goals. Their agenda was simple, ruthless, and terrifying: capture the strongest beings in the world, harness their power, and reshape the world to fit their vision. Naruto Uzumaki was at the top of their list. With his newfound power, his unparalleled strength, and the legendary sword Akatsuki blade now fully attuned to his will, Naruto had become a target. The Akatsuki, ever hungry for power, saw him as both a potential weapon and a significant threat. His ability to wield the divine fire of the sun made him a force unlike anything they had encountered before. It was only a matter of time before they made their move. The assault began at dawn. Konoha's peaceful streets, usually filled with the hustle of everyday life, were soon invaded by the chaotic sounds of battle. A massive explosion shattered the tranquility as the Akatsuki launched their offensive on the village. Their dark cloaks and crimson clouds stood in stark contrast to the bright morning light, a sign that their presence was a harbinger of destruction. The village was caught off guard, the Konoha forces scrambling to defend against the relentless onslaught. The Akatsuki members, their eyes filled with cold malice, moved with terrifying precision, each one a powerful adversary in their own right. Naruto, having been preparing for this moment since the summit, knew that the time had come to face them. His heart pounded in his chest, his senses heightened by the pull of his blade, which seemed to hum in response to the rising conflict. The Akatsuki blade glowed with a fierce, radiant heat, resonating with the divine fire within him. Tsunade had given him the signal to protect Konoha at all costs, and Naruto wasn't about to fail her or his village. His eyes, once full of uncertainty, now burned with a determination that had carried him through countless battles before. Naruto stepped out into the heart of the village, the wind whipping around him as he unsheathed the Akatsuki blade. His body was already in sync with his breath, the powerful sun-breathing techniques flowing effortlessly through him. The air shimmered with heat as he prepared himself to meet the first wave of attackers. His first opponent was none other than Deidara, the master of explosive clay. The Akatsuki member sneered as he unleashed his clay creations, which swarmed toward Naruto with the intent to obliterate him. But Naruto was ready. He breathed deeply, channeling the energy of the sun, and in a single fluid motion, he unleashed the first form, Dance. A horizontal slash of fire erupted from his blade, slicing through Deidara's creations like they were nothing. The clay sculptures, once brimming with destructive energy, were now reduced to ash in a moment. Deidara's expression twisted with frustration. What? What is this power? He hissed, retreating into the air on his clay bird. Impossible. No one can stop my art. But Naruto was relentless. His breath synchronized with the rhythm of his pulse, his body moving like a fluid extension of his will. Art? He yelled back, his voice full of defiance. This isn't art, it's destruction. With a mighty leap, Naruto surged into the air, his sword trailing fire as he followed Deidara's movements. He swung the Akatsuki blade downward, igniting the very air around him, creating a massive blast of flame that sent Deidara plummeting to the ground. You'll regret this. Deidara spat, but he was already struggling to rise, his limbs burned by the inferno. But before Naruto could finish him off, another shadow appeared, Sasori, the master puppeteer. The red-eyed shinobi, known for his mastery of human puppets, stepped forward, his cold, calculating gaze locked on Naruto. I see, Sasori said, his voice even. So, you are the one who wields the sun itself. Naruto tightened his grip on a sword. And I'll use it to protect Kanata, he shouted. Without warning, Sasori released his puppets, their metal limbs clicking as they advanced with deadly speed. Naruto's senses sharpened, and his body moved on its own, his breath guiding him. He executed the third form, Raging Sun with precision, a fiery, spiraling slash that decimated Sasori's puppets with ease. The flames licked at the remaining puppets, consuming them with a brutal intensity. Sasori was forced to retreat, his expression unreadable, but a deep sense of admiration in his eyes. I see. You truly are a force to be reckoned with. Naruto stood tall, his chest rising and falling with the intensity of the battle. But he didn't have time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. The Akatsuki's greatest threat had yet to appear. The true battle would come with the arrival of Pain, the leader of the Akatsuki, and his powerful, godlike abilities. Pain, his eyes glowing with the energy of the Rinnegan, approached the battlefield with his 6 bodies at his side. Each one exuded an aura of danger, and the village seemed to tremble at the sight of him. Tsunade's voice crackled over the communication device in Naruto's ear. Naruto, it's Pain. He's a threat you can't underestimate. We need you to stop him. Naruto's grip tightened around his sword, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This was it. The moment he had trained for, the ultimate test of his power. Understood, Tsunade, Naruto replied, his voice unwavering. I won't let you down. With a final breath, Naruto activated the Spirit of the Sun form, a divine state of being that flooded his body with raw, burning energy. His body radiated with the heat of 1,000 suns, and his sword glowed brighter than ever, a blinding beacon of power. The moment Pain's 6 bodies descended upon him, Naruto was ready. He moved with the speed of a hurricane, his sword carving arcs of flame through the air. Every strike from Naruto sent shockwaves of heat that scorched the ground, and the flames from his sword were more intense than anything Pain had encountered. Pain's 6 bodies retaliated with their devastating jutsu, but Naruto was no longer the same. His movements were swift, almost impossible to track, as he effortlessly danced around Pain's attacks, his breath and spirit perfectly attuned to the power of the sun. The battle was an intense clash of fire and divinity versus the might of the Rinnegan. Finally, with one explosive burst of flame, Naruto unleashed his most powerful attack, the sun's wrath. The entire battlefield erupted in a blinding, scorching explosion, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause in the light of the sun's fury. When the smoke cleared, Pain's 6 bodies were no more, reduced to ashes by the intensity of Naruto's final attack. Pain himself lay on the ground, wounded but alive, his face contorted with disbelief. You truly are the sun itself," Pain rasped, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. Naruto, breathing heavily from the strain of the battle, stood over him, his sword still glowing faintly with the afterglow of divine fire. "I told you," Naruto said, his voice firm. "I'm not here to destroy. But if you stand in my way, I'll burn it all down." With that, Pain, defeated and broken, retreated, leaving Naruto standing alone amidst the ruins of the battlefield. As Naruto returned to Konoha, his body weary but his spirit stronger than ever, the villagers hailed him as a hero. But he knew that this victory was just another step on a much longer journey. The Akatsuki had been defeated, but the world was still full of dangers, and greater threats loomed on the horizon. The Akatsuki blade at his side pulsed with power, reminding him of the long road ahead. The sun would always rise, but it was up to Naruto to decide how he would wield his light. And with that, the true test of his strength had only just begun. The world had known peace for a time, but deep within the shadows, forces continued to stir. Naruto had faced the Akatsuki, driven them back, and shown the world the might of his divine strength. Yet, his journey was far from complete. The greatest challenge, one that had haunted him for years, now loomed before him: Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke had been a friend, a rival, and a comrade. But that was before he had fallen into the darkness, seeking power at any cost. His obsession with revenge had led him down a treacherous path, and despite Naruto's countless efforts to bring him back to the light, Sasuke had only distanced himself further. Naruto had hoped for the best. He had believed, deep down, that Sasuke could still be saved. But now, as the remnants of the Akatsuki stirred and Sasuke aligned himself with them, it became clear that his former friend had embraced a path from which there might be no return. The sun had set over Konoha, casting a golden glow over the village. Naruto stood at the village gates, his mind heavy with anticipation. Sasuke was coming. The wind whispered through the trees, a foreboding feeling settling over him. He could sense the approach of a powerful presence. His hand instinctively moved to the Akatsuki blade, its warmth a comfort amidst the uncertainty. "You knew this day would come," Naruto muttered to himself. His breath steadied as he summoned the sun-breathing techniques within him. It had been years since he first learned them, and now, every technique, every form, was an extension of himself. A dark silhouette appeared on the horizon, moving with precision and purpose. Sasuke. His eyes, once filled with doubt, now glowed with a cold determination. He wore a dark cloak, the Akatsuki symbol visible on his chest, a stark contrast to the bright sun that Naruto had embraced. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he saw Naruto standing there, waiting. His Sharingan spun into place, and a sinister smile curled at the corners of his lips. "So, this is how it ends, Naruto. You've grown stronger, but so have I." Naruto met his gaze with a look of resolve, his grip tightening around the hilt of the sword. "Sasuke. I've always believed there's still a part of you that can be saved. But if you're really set on this path, then I'll stop you here." The two stared at each other, the tension in the air palpable, before Sasuke drew his sword, its blade crackling with the dark energy of his cursed seal. "This is where it ends," Sasuke muttered, his voice heavy with the weight of his decisions. "You've become a tool of the sun, but you will never surpass me. I will reclaim my revenge. Nothing and no one will stop me." Naruto didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his blade blazing with the power of the sun. "If that's the way you want it, then I won't hold back." The battle began in a flash of movement. Sasuke was lightning fast, using his speed and the power of his Sharingan to anticipate Naruto's every move. But Naruto was faster. His training in sun breathing had heightened his reflexes to an unimaginable degree. Each step, each breath, was a step closer to unleashing the full power of the sun. Sasuke attacked first, a barrage of fireball jutsus and lightning-fast slashes that threatened to overwhelm Naruto. But Naruto's body moved like a fluid extension of his will, dodging and parrying with ease. His sword, Akatsuki blade, hummed with divine energy, cutting through Sasuke's attacks with every strike. Second form, clear blue sky. Naruto roared, a horizontal arc of fire cutting through the air with unimaginable force. The flames created an explosion that shook the ground beneath them, but Sasuke was already moving, his Sharingan guiding him through the chaos. He leapt into the air, and in a blink of an eye, he appeared above Naruto, launching a powerful Chidori aimed at his chest. Naruto's eyes flared with intensity. He could feel the heat of the battle, he could feel the flames within him rising. This is it. He didn't dodge. Instead, he faced Sasuke head-on, unleashing third form, raging sun in a surge of fiery energy. The flame erupted around him in a circular blast, engulfing Sasuke's Chidori and forcing it back, the intensity of the heat overwhelming the dark jutsu. Sasuke fell to the ground, skidding back as he struggled to regain his footing. His eyes burned with fury, and his hand clenched tightly around his sword. You still don't get it, Naruto, Sasuke spat, blood dripping from his lip. You'll never be able to defeat me with just that power. You have to understand there's no redemption for me. I have no place in this world. This fight is the only thing left for me. Naruto's expression softened for a moment, his breath steady as he stood tall, his sword glowing like the sun. Sasuke, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to walk down this path alone. I can help you. We can rebuild together. But Sasuke only laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the air. Help me? There's nothing left to rebuild, Naruto. Only destruction remains. With a flick of his wrist, Sasuke activated the power of the Rinnegan, summoning a wave of dark energy that threatened to swallow everything in its path. Indra's arrow. Sasuke shouted, a massive arrow of destructive energy aimed straight at Naruto's chest. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He felt the power building, felt the heat of the sun within him, and for the first time in his life, he fully embraced it. His blade pulsed with radiant energy as he unleashed his final form. Ninth form, Sun's Heart. Naruto cried, his voice filled with unyielding determination. A massive wave of flame erupted from the Akatsuki blade, consuming everything in its path. The sun's power surged through Naruto, the heat and light burning away the darkness of Sasuke's attack. The two powers collided, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The air shimmered with blinding light, and the earth beneath them cracked. When the light faded, Sasuke was on his knees, his body battered and broken, blood pooling around him. His eyes, once filled with cold determination, were now filled with confusion and pain. Naruto stood above him, breathing heavily, his sword still blazing with divine energy. His heart was heavy as he looked down at his friend, his former rival. The battle was over. But Naruto didn't raise his blade to finish it. He couldn't. Sasuke, please, Naruto said, his voice trembling slightly. I know you're hurting. I know you've been through more than anyone should. But this isn't the way. You don't have to carry this burden anymore. Sasuke looked up at him, his Sharingan fading as he met Naruto's gaze. You don't understand, Sasuke whispered, his voice ragged. I've already fallen too far? Naruto dropped to his knees beside Sasuke, his sword still glowing softly in his hands. I don't care how far you've fallen. I'm not giving up on you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. In the end, Naruto spared Sasuke. He couldn't bring himself to end his life, even after everything. Despite Sasuke's hatred, despite the darkness that had overtaken him, Naruto believed there was still a part of his friend that could be saved. I'll bring you back, Naruto vowed, his heart filled with resolve. No matter what, I'll bring you back to Kanata. We'll fix this, together. With that, Naruto lifted Sasuke into his arms and began the journey back to Kanata, the sun setting on their final confrontation, but Naruto's hope for Sasuke's redemption shining brighter than ever. The days following the battle with Sasuke were a blur for Naruto. He had returned to Konoha victorious, but the victory felt hollow. Sasuke's wounds had been grave, and though he had spared his life, the burden of carrying his friend back to the village was one that weighed heavily on Naruto's heart. But as the days passed, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that this was a new beginning not just for him and Sasuke, but for the entire world. Peace was within his grasp. The sacrifices of his past, the countless battles fought, and the lessons learned all led to this moment. The shinobi world was fractured, torn apart by war and hatred, but now, there was hope. And that hope, in the eyes of many, was Naruto Uzumaki. The time had come for the next step. The Kage Summit was called a rare gathering where all 5 Kages, the leaders of the hidden villages, would come together to discuss the future of the shinobi world. The villages had seen Naruto's power firsthand. They had witnessed his strength, his will, and his unwavering belief in peace. And though they had feared him, seen him as a potential threat, they could no longer deny the force he had become. But there were still doubts. Despite the fact that Naruto had single-handedly fended off the Akatsuki, earned the respect of his peers, and stopped countless conflicts, there was still a lingering uncertainty. Would this peace last? Would Naruto truly be able to unite the world, or was he another force that would inevitably succumb to the same darkness that had torn the shinobi nations apart for generations? The summit was held in a neutral location, the Land of Iron, where the samurai had always served as a peaceful buffer between the warring nations. The snow-covered mountains were a stark reminder that there was always a price to pay for peace, and that the winds of war never truly ceased to blow. The Kages were already gathered when Naruto arrived, flanked by his most trusted allies Kakashi, Sakura, Hinata, and even Sasuke, who was still recovering from his wounds but had chosen to join the summit. The group walked through the grand hall, where the Kages waited in silence, their expressions serious and unreadable. Each one represented the future of their respective villages, and each one knew that the decisions made here would shape the course of history. Naruto stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of the Akatsuki blade, which gleamed with divine light. He had been preparing for this moment for years, but now, standing before the leaders of the world, he could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. "Thank you for coming," Naruto said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet power. "I know there are a lot of doubts and fears about what I've become, about what my power represents. But I want to show you something. I want to show you why we can't afford to keep fighting." Naruto raised the Akatsuki blade high, and for a moment, the room seemed to pulse with energy. The sword reacted to his will, glowing with the intensity of the sun itself. The Kages watched in silence, their eyes filled with awe, fear, and fascination. "Fifth form, Sun's reign," Naruto intoned, his voice echoing through the hall. The air around him shimmered as a wave of golden light erupted from the blade, enveloping the room in a warm, radiant glow. The light spread like fire, but there was no heat, only warmth, as if the very essence of the sun was infused into the space around them. The walls of the hall shimmered with the brilliance of sunlight, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had been reborn. Naruto lowered the blade, and the light faded, leaving behind only the echo of the sun's power. "This is what I've learned," Naruto continued, his eyes locking onto the Kages, his gaze unwavering. "This sword, it's not just a weapon. It's a symbol of hope. It's a reminder that there is always light, even in the darkest of times. And we, the shinobi, we are the ones who can bring that light to the world." He looked to the Hokage, the Raikage, the Kazekage, the Tsuchikage, and the Mizukage, each one sitting in silent contemplation. "You've all seen my power," Naruto said. "You've seen what I'm capable of. But what I'm offering you now is not just my strength, it's my belief. My belief that we can put an end to this endless cycle of war. That we can work together to build something better, something lasting." He took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he waited for their response. "We don't have to keep fighting. We don't have to keep tearing the world apart. The villages, the people, we can protect them. Together." The room was silent for a long moment. The Kages exchanged glances, their faces inscrutable. It was clear that they were considering his words carefully, weighing the implications of what Naruto was proposing. Finally, the Hokage, the leader of Konoha and Naruto's mentor, stood up. His eyes were old, but filled with wisdom and understanding. "Naruto," the Hokage said, his voice calm but resolute, "your power is undeniable. And your resolve is stronger than any I've ever seen. But peace is not something that can be achieved with strength alone. It requires trust, cooperation, and a willingness to compromise. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the road ahead will be long, and it will not be easy." Naruto nodded. "I understand. But I'm willing to walk that road. And I want all of you to walk it with me." The Hokage, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms and gave Naruto a long, hard look. "And what makes you think we can trust you, Naruto Uzumaki? What if this power, this sword you wield, is more than just a symbol of hope? What if it becomes a weapon, a tool of oppression?" Naruto met his gaze with the same unwavering determination. "I don't want power for the sake of power," he said. "I want peace. And I will do whatever it takes to protect that peace. I won't let the sword become a tool of destruction." The Hokage chuckled darkly. "Easier said than done, boy. Power corrupts. And a weapon like that. It's hard to trust anyone with that much power." Naruto's eyes hardened, but there was a calmness to his words. "Then don't trust me. But trust in what I'm fighting for. Trust that the people of the world don't need to suffer anymore. We've all been through too much, fought too many battles. The time for war is over." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the Mizukage spoke. "Perhaps it's time," she said softly, "to stop fighting. To finally build a world where our children don't have to live in fear of war." The Kazekage, his stoic face unreadable, nodded in agreement. "A world where our villages can stand together, as allies, not enemies. Perhaps that's worth fighting for." And so, one by one, the Kages stood. One by one, they offered their support, their recognition of Naruto's vision. The decision was made. The Shinobi Alliance would be formed, a coalition of villages that would stand united against any force that threatened their peace. Naruto stood there, his heart racing, as the Kages placed their hands on the table before them, a symbol of their unity. It was the beginning of something new. The sun blade at his side hummed softly, as though acknowledging the dawn of a new era. The sun had risen, and with it, a new world was born. The villages united under the banner of the Shinobi Alliance, bound together by Naruto's unwavering resolve. They would face challenges, no doubt, but for the first time in centuries, there was hope. The cycle of war, destruction, and suffering had come to an end, and a new path lay ahead, one where the light of the sun would guide them all. Naruto had done it. He had united the world, not with the force of his strength, but with the force of his belief. The world would never be the same. And that, for Naruto, was the greatest victory of all. Years had passed since Naruto Uzumaki had become the unifying force that brought the shinobi world together. The villages had flourished under the banner of peace, the scars of war slowly healing. The once divided world had become a place where the children of tomorrow could grow up without the weight of fear and conflict. Naruto had kept his promise. He had led the world into an era of peace, but the greatest part of his journey had come after the final battle, after the moment when the world saw him not just as the bearer of incredible power, but as the symbol of hope. His vision had become reality, and now, he stood at the pinnacle of what he had worked so tirelessly to create. The sun was setting on a world that had been reborn, and with it, the sun itself seemed to honor the sword, saying to the sun the title that had come to be known around the world for the man who had shaped their fate. Naruto's legacy was no longer just a tale for the adults who remembered the days of war. It had transcended time and become part of the fabric of the world. His ideals were woven into the hearts of the next generation, and his teachings had become a beacon that guided them on their journey. Konoha had changed, too. The village that had once been the home of Naruto, the boy who had been shunned, now stood as a monument to the future he had fought for. The Hokage Monument, once only home to the faces of past leaders, now bore the face of Naruto Uzumaki, his likeness carved in stone beside the Hokages of old. Naruto had left the title of Hokage behind. He had no need for it. His place in history was already secured, and his journey had taken a different direction. The school he had founded, the Sun Academy, stood at the heart of the village, its towering walls and open courtyards filled with students eager to learn not only sun breathing but also the values of peace, unity, and self-discipline that Naruto had cherished above all else. The school was a blend of tradition and innovation. It wasn't just a place where children and young shinobi learned to harness the power of the sun's breath, it was a place where they learned the strength of the spirit, the importance of compassion, and the true meaning of responsibility. Naruto had taught his students that strength was not just about power, but about how one used it to protect and uplift others. Sasuke, ever the quiet and reserved figure, had taken on the role of Naruto's trusted co-instructor. Though his path had been fraught with darkness, Sasuke had found his way to redemption under Naruto's guidance. Now, he stood beside his old friend, teaching the next generation how to wield the blade and the breath with precision and grace. Sakura, too, had a place in the academy, not as a teacher of combat but as an instructor in medical ninjutsu. Her skills in healing had grown exponentially over the years, and she had earned the respect of the villages as one of the most skilled and compassionate healers in the world. Her contributions were invaluable, and she worked closely with Naruto and Sasuke to ensure that the academy produced well-rounded individuals, those who were not only strong but also wise, kind, and empathetic. Hinata, who had once stood in Naruto's shadow, now stood beside him as an equal. Her gentle nature and inner strength had always been a guiding force, and her influence in the academy was felt in the way she fostered cooperation and kindness among the students. She had also taken on the role of a leader in the village, her position cemented as one of the pillars of Kanata's future. The academy itself had flourished. Students from all walks of life, from different villages and backgrounds, had come to learn the art of sun breathing and swordsmanship. The teachings of Naruto spread far and wide, and with every passing year, his influence only grew. One day, Naruto stood outside the academy, gazing at the horizon as the sun began its descent. It had been years since he had first discovered the Akatsuki blade, since the day he had unlocked the power of sun breathing and set forth on his journey. Now, standing at the precipice of a new age, he couldn't help but reflect on how far the world had come and how far he had come, too. He was no longer the young, brash ninja who had once sought recognition. He had long since shed that desire, having learned the true meaning of strength. His strength was no longer about proving himself, it was about protecting the world he had built. It was about guiding the next generation to be better than the ones before them. As the last rays of the sun touched the earth, Naruto smiled. His work wasn't done, but it never truly would be. The world was in good hands. The legacy of the sun would continue, passed down from one generation to the next. Behind him, a familiar voice called out. "Sensei, are you just going to stand there all day?" Naruto turned to see a group of students approaching. Some were already wielding swords, their movements still clumsy but filled with determination. Others were practicing their breathing techniques, trying to synchronize their movements with their breath. They were the future of the shinobi world, the inheritors of his legacy. Naruto grinned, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Of course not. I was just waiting for you all to catch up." The students laughed, and the sound filled the air, a reminder that the future was full of hope, full of life. Sasuke stepped up beside him, his arms crossed as usual. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be standing here, watching over a bunch of kids." Naruto chuckled. "Neither did I. But hey, I guess we all have our roles to play now." Sasuke's lips quirked in the faintest of smiles. "Yeah. And yours is to keep these kids from destroying the village with your unique teaching methods." Naruto laughed. "Hey, it's not my fault if they're not ready for the full power of the Sunday." Hinata appeared behind them, smiling softly as she watched the students train. "The future is in good hands, Naruto." Naruto turned to her, his heart swelling with pride. "Yeah, it is. And I couldn't have done it without you." For a moment, the four stood together in silence, watching the students and the village that had grown and thrived in the wake of their efforts. The sun was setting, but the light it cast would never fade, not as long as the ideals Naruto had fought for continued to burn in the hearts of those who followed in his footsteps. Naruto placed a hand on his blade, the Akatsuki blade, feeling its warmth. He knew that, even after his time had passed, the sun would continue to shine. His legacy, and the teachings of the sun, would endure. The future was bright. The light of the sun would guide them all. And that was enough.